Hello, everyone. It's 1 p.m. Eastern, and that means it's time to begin our 90th, can you believe it? 90th CoCoRaHS Weather Talk webinar. Boy, we've done a lot of these over the years. A very warm welcome to all of you out there joining us today. I'm your host, meteorologist Henry Regis, and running the technical side of our program is our very own Noah Newman. We're coming to you live from the Colorado Climate Center here at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. Just to remind you, all of our Weather Talk webinars are sponsored by the generous donations from listeners and viewers just like you. Well, for today's webinar, we have a very special guest. We have the pleasure of having with us Clair Ransom, and Clair is with the World Meteorological Organization. She's coming to us live from Geneva, Switzerland, where they're located. Clair is an assistant science officer in the Climate Monitoring and Policy Division. She will speak about the WMO and its role in monitoring climate throughout the globe. Clair's accent may sound very familiar to many of you, and it's not Swiss. She's originally from a city not far down the road from us here, and that's Denver, Colorado. Clair holds her master's degree in development studies from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland. Clair is working to improve science communication and facilitate understanding of the interconnections between climate change and sustainable development. In addition to her work on the Sustainable Development Goals, she assists with the production and dissemination of the annual global and regional State of the Climate reports. And we'll put a link on the website for you guys to look at those. They're very interesting. I think you'll really get a lot out of that. Clair is a big Colorado Avalanche fan, which is a lot of us out here are, and she's a triathlon runner and swimmer, and I guess I forget what all is on the triathlon, but she's got one coming up, and we're glad to have her with us today. So let's give a big CoCoRaHS welcome to Clair. Clair, it's great having you with us today.
Thanks so much, Henry. I appreciate that. What an introduction.
Well, as we start off our program, we usually ask this question to all of our guests, and that is, what got you interested in weather? Was there a single event, or you're working for the WMO? How did that come about?
I actually was never particularly interested in weather, which is maybe not the best way to start, but my
That's okay.
interest and passion has always really come from the climate side. I took an environmental studies course in my undergrad, and there was, sort of the last couple modules were really about climate change. And I still remember just sitting in that classroom and being absolutely shocked at the rate at which we learned how climate was moving and how swiftly it was changing and how little was being done about it. So that was where my interest in climate really began, but it wasn't until moving to Switzerland and starting to work for WMO that I got more interested in it professionally.
Well, that's great, Clair. That's a lot of times you never know where these classes you take and what they talk about will lead you. So this is very interesting, and we're really looking forward to your presentation today. So without further ado, I'm going to mute my mic and let you take it away.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm glad to have the space to talk a little bit about what I do and what we do as an organization here at WMO. Just before I get started, I'd just like to say there's going to be a couple interactive elements in my presentation. So if you have a phone or a computer nearby, do keep them open because there's going to be a couple sort of quizzes and QR codes to scan. But before I get too far into that, I'll just give a little brief overview of my talk today. I'll give just a brief little background into WMO as an organization, sort of where we started and where we exist. We are a UN agency, and sort of looking at what that environment looks like before digging in a little bit into what we actually do as an organization. It's kind of a vague name, and there's a lot that we do sort of behind the scenes, but I am not necessarily an expert in what the organization does overall. So I will end my talk today really focusing on my work, which is on climate monitoring and policy. And as Henry very briefly introduced, really talking about the State of the Climate report. And from there, it's my understanding that we'll sort of open it up to your questions and discussion. But before I start, I would really just love to know how many of you had ever heard of WMO before today, or I guess before signing up for the webinar. So to answer this question for all of us in real time, you can, as I mentioned, grab a phone, or if you've got a computer, open a new browser tab, and you can either scan the QR code, which you should be able to see on the left-hand side of your screen, or just type in slido.com, and then you can type in that number there at the bottom, 3560 836, and then we can see. So it looks like 4 of you have successfully connected. Great job. 6. Oh, very quickly the no's are joining, and we've taken the lead. This is really fun. It's kind of like watching a race. We get to see. So I can no longer see how many of you are present, but the last time I saw the participants, there were, oh, I can. There's 115 of you online. So maybe we'll wait until we've got about 50 or 60 responses. Looks like you guys are getting pretty close, but it sounds like most of you so far at least have never heard of the WMO, which is really fun for me. And I actually hadn't either, so you're not alone. Don't feel bad if you are among the majority who had never heard of WMO. We are certainly among the smaller UN organizations. We're a specialized agency, and hopefully more of you will have at least heard of the UN, and maybe fewer, but still a significant amount will have heard of the IPCC. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, but there are other UN organizations which are maybe a little bit more famous. FAO is the Food and Agriculture, UNEP is United, is the Environment. So there are other ones, but WMO is among the UN family, and it's looking like the majority is holding. So maybe wait until we get to about 50% of you, but do keep the browser open. Do keep this window open, because there are going to be a few more questions. We can get your input. And do feel free to respond to the question, even if I move on to the next slide, because it's fun for us. We can maybe go back and see if the yeses took it over. But I was not expecting it to be such a close race. I really was expecting much more of you to not have heard of it. So very fun. I'm going to go ahead and move on. But like I said, do keep that open and do respond if you haven't yet had the chance. So WMO is the UN's specialized voice on all things weather, climate, and water related. So you might find yourself thinking that is a very big mix, and especially today, very relevant. And why haven't I heard of this before? Well, luckily for you, now you have. But we weren't always a UN organization. So we actually started off as the International Meteorological Organization, which was the IMO, which was founded in 1873, if you can believe it. So really, it's been around as an organization for quite a long time. Shouldn't be too surprising for those of you who are meteorologists in the group. There's always been an interest sort of in weather data. It's been collected for a very long time, and wanting to sort of make sure that data collection was synchronized is why the IMO was originally founded, but we were then absorbed or welcomed into the UN system as part of the Economic and Social Council in 1950. So what we see here on the left side of the screen, and I'm not sure if you guys can see my cursor, I don't think so, but the left-hand side of the screen is showing the way the United Nations system is generally split up. So we probably have all heard of the Security Council. That's the big one. We're talking about decisions about wars, genocide, human rights, etc. The Economic and Social Council is then where we are hosted, and that really is a lot of the other organizations which have to do, not surprisingly, with the economic and social components. But you'll see maybe some more of the familiar ones might be listed in the General Assembly, and then we are among what we see here in the left, on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the specialized agencies. And I did it in red here because it's a very, very small font. Among a lot of other UN organizations like UNESCO, which might be another familiar one. AO, WHO is another big one. So each of these organizations has its specialization. WHO is health, and we are all things weather and climate related. So that's a little bit of where we fit into the United Nations system. And now another question for you. is to guess who governs WMO, who are our members. So the way, while you guys are responding, I'll sort of talk a little bit about the way that the UN system works. As an international organization, it doesn't just run on its own. It really is run by sort of members, member states, countries that are then responsible for taking decisions, for voting. And generally, these members vary by different organizations. So the WHO, for example, member states are ministries of health, which might be surprising or not to some of you. In this case, there is a right answer, so we're not able to see the responses quite yet, because if I go, the next slide will show us how many of you are responding to which, but I will give you some more, just a few more minutes. Let's say about 30 of you. So your choices here are National Ministries of Environment, International Climate Change Organizations, the UNFCCC, which is the UN Framework on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, National Weather Services, or a mix of all of the above. As we're getting faster at responding to these, well done. So we'll just give it another minute or two. Let's see if we can get up to 50. And then I will reveal the right answer. But our member states are the ones who vote on everything that we do here at WMO. So we have, it's called a Congress, when we pull together all of our member states, and they have to vote on our activities, on our work plans, on our budgets. So they are also, very importantly, the ones who provide us with the finances in order to be able to do the work that we do. All right, so we're looking at almost 50 of you, so I will go ahead and move on. So an overwhelming majority of you said a mix of all of the above, which is very interesting, and I was hoping that that would be the case to sort of trip you up. The answer is actually National Weather Services. So we are governed by, we call them here at the Secretariat NMHSs, so it's the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services. And that is, now some of you are still responding. You have the answer. I'm not sure if that counts, but you are welcome to. Now I imagine that this is gonna jump up to more of the second choice here, but we are governed by National Hydrological and Meteorological Services, or National Weather Services, as we're sort of more commonly known. Those are sometimes housed in ministries of environment. They can also be housed within other ministries. And we are an international climate change organization, so we are not governed by other international climate change organizations. There are certainly many, and we do collaborate with them, among which is the UNFCCC. And the IPCC is actually founded by, in part by WMO. So they don't run us. They are now sort of a separate organization, but they originally stemmed from WMO. So it's actually more of the other way around.
Claire,
so,
Claire, real quick, this is
yeah.
Noah here, just making
yeah.
sure we can see your mouse, so that's, so you can feel free to use it, but just also if you can, your microphone is going in and out just slightly, so it's more a matter of just picking up your voice a little bit, so if you can just make sure to keep on speaking up. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay now? Sometimes it's the headphones.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no
And
problem.
Claire, this is Henry. I've got a quick question. Could you tell how many countries are involved with the WMO? So
yeah, we're at 193.
193. Thanks.
Quite a few. Yeah, of course. So this is taken directly from our strategic plan. So there's a lot of information here, which is maybe not necessary, but what I like about this is sort of the working down from the overarching vision into our long-term goals. And I think that it separates it nicely into the work that we do. And I'll go into sort of each of these goals a little bit more specifically. But basically, our primary vision, or the goal here, is that it will have a world where all countries, especially the most vulnerable, are more resilient to extreme weather and climate events, and that they are able to boost their sustainable development. So that means development across a wide number of areas by being better prepared through weather services. And that's something we'll come back to a little bit to talk about the interconnections between sustainable development and weather. But really, our main goals are making sure that we can reduce the amount of lives that are lost from extreme weather, for then all stakeholders involved to make better decisions regarding weather sort of preparedness, and also then to provide services to other sectors regarding weather and climate so that they are better informed. So it's really, we're working at an individual level all the way up to societal level so that individuals are prepared for extremes, and as well as sector groups, so think agriculture, farmers, energy, all the way up to sort of entire governments are better prepared. And we really do that through a couple different things. The first is by really providing better infrastructure. And I'll dig into that a little bit more, but that really looks like providing better measurements from the ground up. So you all as citizen scientists know how important it is to have good observations of weather, and collecting weather observations, then that's sort of what shapes the climate, right? So it's really working first and foremost on the ground to improve our observations and our infrastructure. It's working to improve science and research, and then it's also working to improve the services that we provide. So really making sure that there's a clear understanding of what weather and climate can do for society. And we do this through a couple of different programs. The first is our member services. So it's a little bit hard to see, apologies for this, but we are split into 6 different regions in WMO. So we at the Secretariat, we are based in Geneva, and we sort of govern the entire organization. But we also have regional offices, which govern then the members, of course, who are in that region. And we have regional offices that then are responsible for engaging more with the members on the ground and for helping us implement projects. So we've got Region 1 in Africa, where our headquarters is in Ethiopia. Region 2 is in Asia, where we've got headquarters. It's kind of the main headquarters are in Singapore, but we've also got an office for the Arab region in Bahrain. In the office in Singapore is also shared with the Southwest Pacific. So we've got another sort of headquarters in Samoa. And then on the other side of the world, for those of you who are based in the US, you're part of the regional office for North America, Central America, and the Caribbean, the longest name. It's got 27 members, and the offices are based in Costa Rica. And then finally, our office in South America, whose offices are based in Paraguay, and we've got 13 members. So this is sort of the organizational distribution of the organization as a whole. But within the Secretariat, we are primarily organized into member services who help us connect better with our members and our regional offices, and then infrastructure and services. So in the infrastructure side of the organization, like I said, is really working on the ground to improve the way in which observations and monitoring are done, but also the way in which data around the observations and monitoring are received, shared, and visualized around the world. So this is a good chart, which I really like, which is telling about a couple different programs that are within the infrastructure departments, which are WIGOS, WIS, and WIPS. We really love our acronyms in the UN system. And so these are different programs which are helping to improve measurements and observations, or WIGOS. And we are really proud that just within the past, I think, 2-3 years now, we have just published we've passed our WMO Unified Data Policy, which has said that all member states have agreed to share their data in some capacity or another with each other in order to better improve the overall system. So of course, you all will know that the stronger our observations are, the stronger our forecasting is, and the better we are able to then predict weather events in the future, and also to go back and do sort of reanalyses and things of that nature. So that's really where the WMO information system comes in. We're really trying to improve the way in which data is exchanged among our members. And then WIPS is, of course, how it's processed into predictions and forecasts. So that's a little bit about the infrastructure branch. They do much more than this. This is not my branch, though, so I'm not 100% sure if any of you do have questions, so just a little heads up, I likely will not be able to answer them, but I will be happy to pass along your questions to colleagues who hopefully can. And the other branch is our climate services branch, and this is where I am housed. We do a number of different things, but a big one is on climate reporting. So you can see a number of reports. On the left are our state of the climate reports, which I will get into a little bit more here in a minute. But we also do reports on the state of climate services. So when we think climate services, a number of you might be sort of wondering what that is. I certainly was for a number of years, and I still, to this day, am learning what that really entails. There are so many different things, but when we talk about climate services, it really is how weather and it's not just weather. We talk about climate, we're in the climate branch, but there is, of course, weather is what makes up our climate. There are a number of different services that can be provided. So really, it means providing things like tailored products, of forecasts, of seasonal outlooks, of what is the weather going to look like for certain sectors. And that really entails that members, or our national weather services, are well equipped to have their observations and monitoring in place, to be managing their data well, to be receiving data from other countries and maybe nearby or others around the world, and that then they're able to forecast the weather or the climate or extreme events and provide that information in a useful way. So for example, here we've got the state of climate services was for water. So we were looking at what was the capacity of NMHSs around the world to provide services to the water sector. And in these reports, we're also looking at sort of what is the state of the connection between climate and water, and of course there are a pretty big one. And then what are the capacity levels? And then from there, with that information, what we do is see, where is there lower capacity, and how can we then help members to improve that? In 2022, it was for energy. There's also been a state of climate services for agriculture, and this year the report will be focusing on sort of overall capacity. And we also have a number of different sectors within our services branch. So we've got a group on health, on energy, on agriculture, on water, and each of these sectors is really responsible for looking at the intersections between weather, climate, and that sector, and in better improving the capacity, not only of NMHSs to work with those sectors, but also of improving understanding sort of worldwide of those interconnections. So you can see here on the top right that we have this sort of global knowledge portal for climate and health that's really trying to help health practitioners and national ministries of health to better understand the interconnections of weather and climate on health. So we can think about things like being better prepared for heat waves and extreme heat, which can have a really detrimental impact on health. Our water colleagues, they do quite a lot in terms of helping. We have what's called a flash flood guidance system. So that's looking at extreme flooding, of course, and being prepared to help members on the ground to implement a system so that we can reduce the livelihoods and lives lost. But then they also have now started doing a report as well. We're looking at the state of water resources around the world and really looking at things like where are our water basins changing, river flow, things like that. And then, of course, our most famous initiative is the Early Warning for All initiative. So we were tasked by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, 2 years ago to lead an initiative called Early Warning for All. And that really entails that every single person on Earth by 2025 should be covered by an early warning system. So the US already has a pretty good system in place. I'm sure many of you will be aware that if there's extreme weather happening, you will get some sort of alert, usually on your phone. We also, in Colorado, I never actually experienced one in Denver, but I did experience the drills. So when there was a tornado coming, we would hear the sirens. And I'm very fortunate to never experience a tornado, but these are early warnings, right? So these prepare you to know that there is an extreme event coming your way and to take the proper precautions. So now this is a huge task. It's a huge undertaking for WMO. We're not doing it alone, though. Thank goodness. This is combined with several other UN organizations, among which UNDRR, so it's the Disaster Risk Reduction, the Intertelecommunications Union, the Red Cross are all collaborating to make sure that the early warnings are being provided from the very beginning. So that means that countries have sufficient observations to be able to forecast when an event is coming, to then the infrastructure, the telecommunications infrastructure, so that everybody has some sort of device or accessibility to receive a message, and then it's getting out to the people who need it the most. So just a little bit of an overview.
Let me ask you a quick question
Yeah.
on these climate reports and state of the climate services. Are they available to the general public? Can they view those on your website?
Yeah, of course. And I can maybe give you guys a little tour. We've just got a new website. It's not the best, not the most intuitive, but happy to show you guys where to find these. So I'll dig in now a little bit into our state of the climate reports. This is what my team is responsible for and what I think are among WMO's most important. And we do these reports at a couple different levels. So the most famous is probably our global report, which we do on an annual basis every year. We prepare it for COP, which is the Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC, so to the climate change. There are multiple COPs, but the big one is on climate change. And we prepare this information so that this big climate change conference can be best equipped with the information about what the year looks like. But we also prepare them at the regional level. We do a multi-year assessment. We take sort of a longer time scale to look at what have been the changes over the past 5 to 10 years. And now, which is actually not on this slide, we are rolling out national reports as well. So I'm responsible now for doing a couple national reports to help countries sort of determine the state of their climate. And each of the reports really follows a similar structure. So we look at what we call key climate indicators, which really mean the different components which make up our climate system. So as many of you will be aware, when we say our climate, that's not the same thing as saying our oceans. There's not something tangible really that we can see or we can feel, and that's part of why the climate crisis has gotten, I think, as far as it has, because really our climate system is made up of various component parts. So among those which we measure are temperature, of course, and that's what we hear when we talk about climate change. Often temperature is what we most associate. But really importantly, ocean heat is a big part of that because the ocean absorbs some of the heat in the global system, which we will also come back to. Of course, atmosphere, how much of CO2 is in the atmosphere we do, and not just CO2, we do free greenhouse gases, which are also methane and nitrous oxide. We look at the state of the ocean, so ocean acidification, which is coming from the oceans absorbing that carbon dioxide, and then sea level, which is a result of our melting glaciers, warming seas, and others. And then the cryosphere, so the sort of frozen components of the Earth, so looking at what is the extent of our glaciers and our sea ice at the poles. And together, each of these indicators is not by any means claiming to represent the entire climate system, but rather a few component parts. And we look at monitoring them from year to year to see just how, unfortunately, how badly is the situation, how are things going. Not a lot of good news, I'm afraid. It's a pretty depressing job for me, unfortunately. And then we also look at extreme events, which are the indicators are much longer term. Extreme events, of course, are something that is happening on a much shorter term. And these are things like heat waves, droughts, floods, wildfires that have occurred around the globe. And then we try to sort of bring in the human side. So to look not just at what is happening in these indicators and these extremes, but what were the impacts. So looking at who was affected by these events and some of the policy side. So looking at what are we doing about it at the global level, but also at a national level. And in that policy side, it's looking at things like NDCs, which are nationally determined contributions. So countries who have voluntarily said, here's what we are doing about climate change. It's looking at climate services. So we pull from those reports I was discussing earlier to see what are the current capacities of NMHSs to sort of contribute to different sectors, and how prepared are they, and a number of different other policy components that really depend on which reports we're talking about. And these reports, like I mentioned, are available both physically in our library, and we also have a number of digital resources that are available. So I can maybe just share those with you now. So this is, let me just quickly hop in here. If you go to our website, which is WMO.int, very easy to find, you'll see actually we just released our State of the Climate in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I can maybe use this as an example. If we click on this, you'll see what we call a landing page, which is just a couple of the key messages of the report. They can be very long. So are you still seeing this? I hope so. I lost the little red box.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Okay, good. And then you can read a little bit about the report. And if you click here on View Report, it will open it up in our library. We also have a little short video about the report. And then we have our digital resources. So I'm responsible for creating what we call story maps, which are the more interactive versions of the report. Personally, I find them a little bit easier to digest than the big, lengthy scientific reports, but it depends on each person. So you'll see that the story maps are divided in the same way that the reports are. So we have the climate, extreme events, impacts, and then policy. The difference is that they're interactive. So you can sort of look at the data and play with it for a number of different graphs. And the information is presented a lot more visually. So it's there together with pictures, videos, charts, etc. But if you're interested, you can also find the report in the normal PDF version, which looks like this. Might take a minute to load. I also have lots of tabs open, so it might take an extra long time.
Maybe you can show folks where they can find the one for the United States.
So the United States actually doesn't have one through WMO because it's done through BAMS, which is the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. I can show you where to find the global one and then also point to the BAMS report. So if you just go to under resources here, we have what are called publication series. And this means publications that we do year after year. And you can find, we have, for example, the State of Climate Services, the State of Water Resources, and then each of the regions divided here, the State of the Global Climate. And unfortunately, you still have to go through a number of clicks to get to the publications, but if you scroll down, you'll see related publications. You can see the different years for which the report is available. It does go back all the way to 1993. We only show a couple here because we figure people aren't really wanting to look at the state of the climate in 1993. But then we have a similar sort of structure. And then the last sort of digital resource that I will share with you guys, we have a dashboard of climate indicators. This is actually the wrong one. I need to flag that to our web team. But this is really where you can find all the data that feed into our reports. It's less interactive than the story maps, but you can download the data as a CSV or just the images if you're interested in reusing them. So the other one is the BAMS State of the Climate. My computer is not loving finding so many tabs. Here we go. And this is the one that's specific for the US. And because this is done and is so well done, in fact, we don't repeat it. We let them sort of do theirs, which might take another minute or so to load. Here we go. So this is a look at 2022. I would recommend just looking at the executive summary for those who are interested. It is a very long report. So the executive summary really provides sort of the overview, but should you be interested, you can download the whole thing and see what the climate looks like in the US. So there's a couple of resources. I'll be happy to put those in the chat for those of you who are interested. But the last thing that I'm going to jump into is a little bit about the SDGs and the sustainable development component. So my last sort of quiz for you guys is how much warming within the global systems when we emit greenhouse gases, we are amplifying the warming of the planet, and just how much of that is absorbed by the ocean, approximately. So this is, of course, an approximation. This is not an exact figure, but would love to know what you guys think. Or is any of it absorbed by the ocean? I did mention that earlier, so hopefully none of you pick 0, but maybe 0%. Maybe I was throwing you off the trail. 15%, 50%, or 90%. This is sort of a fun one. This is a big area for me that I was not aware of when I started working here. And the reason I'm asking you this is because it's one of our indicators, ocean heat. And it's an example that I'm going to show you in just a minute when we go through the answers, is to help you understand then what are the connections between climate change and sustainable development. And specifically what we're going to talk about are the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's an agenda that was set by the United Nations and agreed upon by all of the countries in 2015. And they were the set of goals that replaced the Millennium Development Goals. So every decade or so, the UN sort of reassesses what are our shared goals as a world. What are we aiming for? And this is the agenda that they've set for 2030. And it's split into 17 different goals that assess different sectors. And we'll get into that a little bit. So part of the work that I started doing when I initially came to WMO was to map out the impact of changes in our climate system through our indicators to the SDGs. And I'm going to show you ocean heat as an example of that. Got about 50 of you. It's slowed down, so I think as many of you who want to answer have done so. Very good. Many of you are well informed. You got this one correct. The ocean does absorb a majority of the heat in our global system. So it's about 90%. It's actually more than 90%. And that has done an incredible job in regulating our climate system. But it does, however, have very significant consequences for a number of different sectors and areas. So what we've done in our team is a mapping of all of the sort of academic research and literature to see what are the possible consequences. And these are, again, this is sort of academic and more theoretical, and not necessarily the actual consequences that we're seeing, although it is happening in a number of different areas. That sort of map down the changes in the climate system through to its impacts on the ground and to human sort of societies and sectors. So what we can see is that as the oceans are warming, first of all, they are not as able to absorb the warming of the global system, and so then this could lead to more warming of the globe as they have less capacity. Which is then going to have a consequence on our climate action, as the climate action that we take will be less effective the warmer the oceans get. It can also cause algal blooms and eutrophication, which can have a direct impact on human health. They can be really dangerous, but that can also really impact biodiversity, marine biodiversity. So we see goal 14, for example, is on marine life, which can also be significantly impacted from stratification. So when we see as the oceans get warmer, they start to change the layers of stratification, which can then block nutrients from getting where they need to go, and can have a pretty significant impact on biodiversity as well. And then, of course, what we maybe all are familiar with, having seen lots of photos, is that as the ocean is warming, corals are bleaching. And corals, as we all know, are really essential to a lot of marine life. But that then does not just impact the marine life, but it also impacts the human lives that depend on these marine ecosystems thriving. So when we look at things like fisheries, as we start to see reduced biodiversity, there can be an impact to fisheries, which can lead to food insecurity and reduced livelihoods. And that sort of nexus can lead to conflict. And of course, a lot of these corals are really beautiful. We think about Australia, for example. The Great Barrier Reef is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And as the corals are bleaching, this is causing tremendous losses for natural heritage and for tourism as well. So this is just a little bit of an example of the work that I personally do, trying to connect the changes in the climate system with the sustainable development. Now what we're working on to adding this is a publication that was released a couple of years ago. We're now trying to work on adding some real life examples to this so that people can see that these aren't just sort of theoretical connections, but corals really are bleaching. They really are impacting livelihoods. And this is really a loss of natural heritage and of biodiversity together. So that's about it. I hope that you all have enjoyed this, that this has been helpful and enlightening, especially to those who had never heard of WMO and who are interested in the climate. I will stop sharing, but I will share my presentation later with Henry, who I think will disseminate it to all of you, and then you can find the links here, and I can also pop those in the chat. So thanks so much.
Claire, thank you. That was a great presentation and a really good overview of what the WMO does and the publications and how you monitor climate. So that really appreciate you taking time. And I know it's rather late over there, so appreciate this. Well, we've got a couple questions that have come through. So if you don't mind, I'll relay those to you. And one, both Keith and Tom were wondering is that how is the WMO funded, and does the U.S. government support the WMO?
Yes, it does. The WMO is funded through our member states. I'm not exactly sure to what extent they are voluntary versus mandatory contributions, to be perfectly frank, but the U.S. is one of our biggest donors, I'm sure.
And Keith also was wondering, does the WMO lobby for change in policy that is things that are detrimental to the climate right now?
We don't, and this has been a huge challenge for me individually, having seen and sort of working on in the climate sphere and having to constantly report that things are going from bad to worse. But we are a United Nations organization, so it's not our role, and in fact, it's sort of against our mandate to do any sort of political lobbying. We are here to provide the science and to provide the facts, and then for other organizations who potentially have more political liberty than we do, to really push and to lobby against any sort of, or lobby for better climate action against things like greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, no, it's not within our mandate to do any lobbying.
Great. Here's another one here. And Sarah is, she loves polar meteorology and climatology, and she was wondering, is Antarctica included in any of the Southern Hemisphere regions?
Yes, it is. And we actually, it's an interesting sort of situation right now because as the poles are melting, there are sort of increasing opportunities for science, but also for sort of other interests in Antarctica. So we actually have a working group right now that's working on sort of bettering our role and our sort of strengthening our presence in Antarctica and looking at what the future of that will be. So yes, and it will be increasingly so.
And this question from Patricia may be outside your purview, but first of all, she said, thank you very much for the presentation. She was wondering who was responsible for revising or creating immigration policy pertaining to climate change refugees, as that would be more societal than political. Is there anything?
Yeah, so that's the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and UNHCR, which is the High Commission for Refugees, are both very active in this area. So they are both contributors to our State of the Climate report, and they report on how weather and climate events have caused displacement and are sort of impacting migration flows. But we don't necessarily do much more with that information other than report on it. They are then the organizations that do much more of the advocacy and work on the ground in terms of supporting migrants and also advocating for stronger policy.
Emily's asking if you know how ocean heat is measured. So do they drop thermometers in the water? What happens? How do they do that?
Yeah, great question. I actually am not super sure of the instrumentation. I do believe that they're measured in buoys that are distributed throughout the seas, but they're also, I believe, measured from ships. So as ships are crossing the ocean, they have their own instrumentation, which then gets reported back. But I'm afraid I'm not 100% sure. It's not my area.
Okay, thanks. And Hannah has an interesting question, and I don't think it's a WMO job, but anyway, she was wondering, does WMO help predict an event like the tsunami of 2004, and in order for a public emergency message to be relayed? How does that happen?
Yeah, we do. So we do a couple different things. The first thing is that we really are trying to help countries to better improve their own predictions. So that's working with them on making sure that they've got their own sort of monitoring systems in place, that their data is as strong and as robust as it can possibly be. But I do believe that we have sort of a tropical cyclone program. I'm not sure how into forecasting it is for society versus for countries, and then they sort of can disseminate out the message. But we do. The name of the program I'm now completely blanking on, but we do have a program within the Secretariat that works on that.
Okay, here I've got two more questions. If you've got time to we'll get through these real quickly. The person here says, I know it's complicated, but what is being done to aid poor countries like Sudan to improve their infrastructures toward more sustainable water control, like flooding and so forth? Is there, you guys involved?
Yeah. So there's a lot that's going on. There are a lot of different programs. Sudan is a very specific example that I don't want to provide any information. It's not correct. But my hydrology colleagues, there are a number of different programs that they and projects. So something I didn't really mention a whole lot is that WMO also does projects. So we do have work on the ground that's helping build the capacity of a number of different countries. One of them is called Hydro Hub. So I think that that's helping a number of different countries. I'm not sure if Sudan is among them yet, or if there's a plan for that, but to help countries improve their hydrological monitoring. And we have a number of different, not just for water resources, but of course, WMO is strongly invested in helping observations and monitoring across a number of different countries. A project that I'm a part of is called CLIMSA, which I actually don't know. It's another acronym that stands for something, but it's really looking at strengthening the climate services value chain. So that's from observations and monitoring, which looks at things like infrastructure, all the way through the climate services provided at the policy level in countries in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. So we're really looking at countries that are the most vulnerable and have the lowest capacity. So there are a number of different programs. I couldn't say specifically though about Sudan and flooding.
Okay, and our last question of the day comes from Angie in Iowa. And I think this is really a good one for folks here at CoCoRaHS and so forth. She says, what can volunteer nonprofits, citizen scientists do more to help the organization's goal, your organization, if anything, beside observations? So what can we do out there to help the WMO out as a citizen scientist?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one I certainly should have anticipated coming to present here. And I actually might turn that over to you, Henry, who's you're a little bit more of an expert and who's been working with WMO. But I can say that we are within our State of the Climate team working on figuring out how to better integrate citizen science and observations into our reporting. It's something that's really important. I think one thing, and I'm not sure how international our audience is here. I think it's mostly US, but one thing that I would like to see is a better reach out sort of internationally, so we could start to see strengthened citizen science from countries who might have sort of lower observational capabilities or might have bigger gaps in their networks. So that's where sort of more citizen observations could come in. Another thing I think is really just, at least for our team, is really very important to vote, to use your voice and to advocate for stronger climate policy wherever you can. And then also just to check out our resources, to inform yourselves and to share them with your networks, because like we saw at the beginning, a number of you didn't even know that WMO existed. and are involved in this sort of meteorological space. So imagine if you don't know that we exist, somebody who might not have as much interest in this realm or have no idea about this and work in a completely different space, who's in your network might really benefit and might be able to learn something. So that would be my answer, is really just try to inform yourselves and share. But Henry, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Claire. I think a really important thing is to become more aware of what's going on out there, and to connect with organizations like the WMO, to kind of read some of the materials, to become more educated, more climate literate. So you can share that with your families and so forth. And, as you travel, a lot of our folks do travel around into different countries and so forth. I would make them aware as well, what they can do for that. And so really, that's a quick and easy one. Again, your observations do make a big difference. They wind up here as a permanent part of NCEI, the used to be the National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina. So after 100 CoCoRaHS observations, you become part of the Climate Daily, I'm forgetting the acronym off the top of my head. I should know.
GHCN.
There it is, GHCN, Global Historic Climate Network Daily. And that goes into the permanent record. That helps with climate. Look at that stuff does get looked at by the folks that do the BAMS publications. And so again, just you're doing what you're doing is helpful, but also becoming more aware. And as Claire said, vote on different things. That's one way you can voice that and so forth. So that would be my answer. And again, we thank you for taking the time, Claire. I know busy schedule, and you've been great to work with there when I've worked at doing stuff with the WMO. So really appreciate this, and our audience does too today. So we thank you for that.
Hey, yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Henry. This was fun.
So I'm gonna say, as we close out today's program, we want you to know that our next Weather Talk webinar will be taking place in September. We kind of take a little vacation here for the summer, but that'll be from the Climate Center's own Peter Goebel, and he'll look at assessing drought in remote locations. Those mostly being forests. We'll have the date and the registration information out later this summer. So check our website and our message of the day for that. Before I forget, when signing off today, please take the survey that will pop up on your screen. And so until we meet again, this is Henry Regis for the rest of the CoCoRaHS team saying goodbye for now and wishing each of you a terrific summer ahead.